Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 152 of ASBN Live, Shifting the Mindset from Despair to Determination on Climate Change. I hope you heard the bird chirping that we had going on in the background to set the mood and get us in the spirit of connecting with nature. I'm your host, Tulasi Sivalingam, the American Sustainable Business Network's Director of Events and Programming. I am here from the Lenape lands, and I really just want to say thank you to ASBN's Livable Planet Working Group for putting together this amazing session. I'm really excited to hear from this panel, and I will allow Sierra to tell us a bit more about what the working group does, what it is, and also to introduce this awesome panel of speakers.
Thank you so much, Tulasi. It's great to be with you and all of you today. My name is Sierra Flanagan, and I'm the co-chair of the Livable Planet Working Group. We're one of about a dozen working groups that exist within ASBN. And our working group we exist as a bit of a global watering hole, if you will, for change makers, entrepreneurs, investors, business and nonprofit leaders, all committed to a livable planet for all of life. And we have monthly meetings. One of them, a couple of meetings ago, was hosted by our member, Randy Hayes of Rainforest Action Network. And we asked him to give us the 411 on the new climate, the IPCC climate report. And we said, Randy, we want the deets, but can you not make it super depressing for us? And he masterfully presented for us on the science and the findings, but also framed it as a way to motivate us and to encourage individual and collective action. So that was really the seed of today's conversation. And in Randy's making the case why we cannot fall into the trap of despair, multiple times he cited Bronson Grisham's article from Time magazine. And so we thought, let's invite Bronson and continue this conversation. And we also enriched the conversation by inviting ASBN member Sherry Smith, founder of Indigenous Energy Initiative, and Liz Rubin, CEO of Ecodio, as we explore this session on how do we stay determined in the face of climate change? How can we be ambassadors for the bright future that we're working so hard to create? So I'm going to invite each panelist to give us a little introduction, and then we're going to dive into the questions. We're going to start with the science. What is it that we really need to know? And then we're going to talk about what's giving our panelists hope on the ground. And then we're going to turn that into some calls to action for the business community who's watching. So Sherry, if I can invite you to first introduce yourself.
Thank you, Sierra. Hello, everyone. My name is Sherry Smith. I am a descendant through both of my parents of the Mi'kmaq Nation of present-day Maine and the Canadian Maritimes. I am calling in today from my home on the Narragansett Reservation on some ceded land here in present-day Rhode Island. I'm honored to be here. Thank you so much, Tulasi and Sierra, for inviting me here with my esteemed colleagues, Liz and Bronson. I am founder and CEO of Indigenous Energy Initiative. We announced last week at our Tribal Energy Equity Summit that we are winding down the initiative and we are standing up the Alliance for Tribal Clean Energy. So that's some exciting news. My background, I've been in clean energy and climate for, I'm old, so 3 decades. Starting in Washington, D.C., I kind of cut my teeth in policy and markets and finance as one of the original 5 team members of the American Council on Renewable Energy, and then was a consultant for years and years to the Department of Energy and stood up programs like Solar Ready Veterans, Solar Instructor Career Network, Solar Career Map, and supported New York State Energy Research and Development Authority in rolling out clean energy and energy efficiency and climate change mitigation programs through the CUNY and SUNY systems. And after a stint in corporate at Solar City and then Tesla, I was called to found this organization to support tribes in making a self-determined transition to clean energy. So I am honored to be here, and thank you. I can't wait for our conversation.
Thank you, Sherry. Liz, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Liz. It's honored to be here with you all, Bronson, Cherie, Sierra, Dulasi. Thanks for having me, and I'm honored to be on this panel. Really excited about this conversation. I'm a Gen X filmmaker of 20 years. I'm a former recovering camera person for 15 years behind a lens on documentaries and really bad TV shows, advertisements. I worked in Hollywood and politics. I worked on a lens for 15 months on the road behind Obama's re-election campaign. And after that, I was on 5 continents behind a camera at UN Sustainable Development meetings. Lucky enough to be in places like the Paris Treaty and filming things. And I started a firm about 8 years ago called Ecodio. It's Eco, Code, and Video. And it's a B Corp video firm focused on climate solutions. I'm a Gemini. I've spent most of the last decade in California, but right now I'm living in this unheard of place called New York on Lenape land. And I'm really excited for this conversation about moving from despair to determination.
Awesome, Liz. Thank you so much. Bronson?
Good afternoon, Bronson Griscom. I am Vice President of Natural Climate Solutions at Conservation International. And I've originally cut my teeth in forest ecology. So I'm a forest scientist, and I guess I'd say over the past 15 years, I've been working on the intersection between ecosystems and climate, and how protection, restoration, and better management of ecosystems can actually be a big part of our climate solution, alongside driving down fossil fuel emissions and everything else we need to do. Based in a town called Harrisonburg, Virginia, which is in the Shenandoah Valley.
And we're super grateful because Bronson took a break from his vacation to be with us today. So thank you all three for being here. You can hear our panelists have an extensive background as activists, change makers, all have found unique ways to express their voice and to stand up for the voices of those that can't. And so we're really excited to talk today about how we navigate the complexity we're all dealing with, personally and professionally. Donella Meadows, who many of you know, talks about leverage points. You know, you can change the rules of a system and you can change the terms of a system, but really to make the greatest change, you focus on the greatest lever, she says, is mindset and paradigm. So we're going to call this panel Breaking Down Silos for Planetary Progress, but we decided that it was really important that we actually name the elephant in the room. And so we want to start with the science, get a baseline. So as of today, the average global temperatures, as we know, have risen 1.2 degrees since pre-industrial levels. The highest concentration of carbon in the atmosphere in 2 million years, around 421 plus parts per million of carbon. We know that a safe level is around 350 parts per million. So we're over budget, if you will. Global warming in turn accelerates the decline of biodiversity, sixth mass extinction. You all know this. But I think it's fair to say we're cutting it a little too close for comfort with a number of planetary system boundaries. And we're seeing the impacts of this happening all over, from the fires in Halifax to the flooding in Italy. So those of us in the climate space, I think we're not surprised, but nonetheless shocked with the news of just a couple of weeks ago, the global temperature being slated to hit the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold by 2027, even sooner than we thought. Obviously, there are some factors with the El Nino and La Nina, but we just wanted to kind of address it in the face. And Sherry, I'd love to start with you. How do we explain the moment we're in with climate to the next generation? And specifically for you, how do you explain it and make sense of it as a Native woman?
That's a heavy question. I don't know that we can make sense of it as much as explain how it's happened and talk about why we do what we do to keep our spirits up and to continue to have hope. My children, you know, it makes me sad what colonization has done to the planet. My European ancestors had a hand in it, and I grapple with that for sure. But it's also a big part of what motivated me to pursue a career that attempts to right the wrongs of my settler ancestors in honor of my Indigenous ancestors and in support of today's Native people and communities and all marginalized communities who are so often at the front lines, as we like to say, of climate change. I have taught my children about two Mi'kmaq concepts that kind of drive me in my work, and that were passed on to me through my grandparents, my Indigenous grandparents, and parents. They are Netikulimk and Eduaptamumk, and there's no test later on how to spell those. Don't worry. The Netikulimk is a complex cultural concept that it encompasses Mi'kmaq sovereign lifeways and sort of guides our behaviors around resource protection, how we procure our resources, and how we manage ourselves to ensure and honor sustainability and prosperity, not only for the ancestor, but for the present and future generations. So simply put, it's the use of natural bounty provided by Creator for the self-support and well-being of the individual and the community, which are inexorably linked to our planet. And Netikulimp means that we can have adequate standards of community nutrition and economic well-being and health without jeopardizing the integrity and the diversity or the productivity of our natural environment. That's possible. We, before colonization across the globe, we were living that way as humans. And so this is an essential concept for Mi'kmaq people and many other Indigenous societies. And it really guides us in the physical and emotional and social and spiritual relationships that we have with everything, including the physical features of our land and the rhythms and patterns and cycles of Wisgidamu, of Mother Earth, and all her living and beings and non-living things that are here on our planet. So again, I think it's safe to say that all Indigenous cultures have a similar guiding principle, and we rely on that and remember that Earth has the ability to repair herself, but there is a point where we have to stop the destruction, and that we need to all work together to do that. And that points to another concept at the Waptamunk, which in English translates to two-eyed seeing. And this refers to the deliberate and willingness to see from one eye the strengths of Indigenous knowledge and wisdom and lifeways, and from the other eye, the strengths of Western technology and knowledge. And this is a concept that my Mi'kmaq ancestors applied to daily life from first contact with settlers. On the East Coast, we were settled really early. Like the hereditary chief that I descend from was baptized Catholic in 1605, right? So really early. And my ancestors recognized that it was essential, this practice of this two-eyed seeing was not only essential for their survival, but that it leads to powerful relationships and collaborations with the goal of working together to leave the world a better place for future generations. And this is the core belief that I founded this organization on, and what gives me hope that we can rely on each other to halt climate change and allow Wuzgidamu, Mother Earth, to heal herself.
Thank you, Sherry. That's beautiful. Liz, how do you understand the moment we're in from your vantage point of being a B Corp, a filmmaker, a small business, a human being?
Sure. Great question, Sarah. And I love this concept of two-eyed vision so much, Sherry, especially as a Gemini. But I really, really appreciate that a lot. I want to learn more. As someone who works in climate solutions day in, day out, I mean, I think the answer to this question is very much a lot of imagination is required. Holding onto a future vision is critical for me and the work I do, and with the folks that I'm collaborating with. It seems like every single day, keeping that vision at the forefront is the only way, really, because we're building a future that's not yet here yet. It's not here yet. And, you know, I'm producing content a lot daily where we don't have visuals for it. So it's like making the ideas tangible. Folks are so busy building solar arrays and infrastructure and green building and regenerating farms, and that they're so busy doing it that they're not talking about it. So I think that's one, is just holding vision. Two is a ninja mindset. I'm going to quote Yoda. I'm going to do it. The force is with you always. So keeping the force with you always, I think to be in this moment. It's about being really, really disciplined. That means with your media consumption. Mainstream media is funded by business as usual, and in my opinion, and it's still dominant. And we're, in my personal view, it's not really helping. It's actually quite destructive to the environment, to our culture, financially. And I think that redesigning your media intake is a good way to handle this moment, maybe with two-eyed vision. Keep your eye on mainstream media, but for example, folks in this room and in our in this circle, in the American Sustainable Business Network, for example, maybe more time on their feeds, more on their news feeds than the mainstream media, for example. Solar is not only, for example, if we take solar is not only the fastest growing job creator, but in 30 years, it's going to be running 35% of the world's energy. So it's like, why aren't we talking about that every day, all the time? In my work, I'm personally focused on innovations and how does that eco-innovation need to be communicated, and to what audience, and how can we make that understandable? Because it's really easy to fall into our silos in this moment. So I guess that's some thoughts. And the last thing just to say about this moment is, there's 5 billion videos watched daily, something like that. So making more of the content out there, whatever it is, about these innovations and climate progress is what motivates me. It's proportionally small compared to the media that's out there. So that's what personally helps me through this moment, is shifting the narratives.
Thank you, Liz. Yeah, that's a big, for sure, opportunity. And I think theme of this conversation is shifting the narrative. And you named the media consumption. I think, something that's showing up for me is just how can we be really discerning about all the stimuli that we're being bombarded with. So Bronson, you're a climate scientist. You're a scientist and an author, and you wrote the article urging us not to despair. So how are you making sense of the moment? How do you explain this to your children? And then I know you have a slightly different take on this perspective. So excited for you to share that with us.
Absolutely. Well, I guess I would say that I don't know if I have a different take. I can only agree, Sierra, with I think with that sense of peril that you expressed about sort of the latest news about, so absolutely we are at, I think, at the greatest global peril than we've ever been before. And so I don't have a different take on that. But I do have, and I don't know if this is a stretch to reference again Sherry's point about seeing with two eyes, but it is this duality in that I do have an additional take. So I'm agreeing with that sense of peril, and I think everybody should not essentially resist kind of confronting a lot of that is available now in lots of different media outlets about the very real and sort of terrifying observations that we are making about the state of the world. However, I think we're also poised for the greatest global turnaround in history. And so let me explain that for a little bit. There is something called peak land. It's a concept. So ever since for hundreds of years, we have been in a chronic process of essentially expanding sort of the human footprint on the earth, which has had profound impacts on the chemistry of the atmosphere, not to mention the functioning of our ecosystems. We have reached, this is something that blew my mind when I read about it maybe a decade ago. We are at a point where despite that, essentially from for hundreds of years, that trajectory has now actually stabilized. And there's every expectation that we are about to turn around and actually enter what we can think of as an age of restoration, right? Where actually the human footprint on the earth is actually is now sort of flatlined, and it's about to start contracting. Why is that? One reason, one of the most critical reasons, is that the rate of human population growth is slowing faster. It's growing, right? Human population is growing, but the rate of growth is slowing, and it is peaking. It looks to be peaking sooner than we thought. So that, and why is that? Well, there's all kinds of virtuous trends which in these very difficult moments we need to remind ourselves of. Women's education is one of the most key reasons why that rate of human population growth is declining. Other basically virtuous patterns of positive stories that are resulting in people making decisions about being able to basically make more decisions about their lives. And actually that is resulting in this stabilization. Meanwhile, technology, agricultural technology, is continuing to improve apace. And so the required land to feed this growing human population is actually declining faster than the human population growth. And so we're about to turn that corner. Think about that for a moment. That's incredible, right? Think about that, I've always been in this mindset of like, wow, we're just, as an ecologist, like an ecologist lives in a world with wounds, right? And this constant sense of like looking around at these, ecosystems and everything. And obviously there's all kinds of social and cultural wounds that others here, are even more kind of in touch with and sort of communicating about, and all those things are wrapped together, right? But think about this notion that we are about to turn that corner, that we could hand our kids and our grandkids and sort of into a world that's basically in a restoration sort of whole long phase of restoration. That's incredibly exciting. There's one fly in the ointment, and that's climate change, right? This is a big fly in the ointment. Having said that, one of the biggest solutions to climate change is actually accelerating that restoration. I will return to this theme a little later, I think, in the conversation. We're in a double or nothing bet, right? It's either going to get both worse and better. And the question is, will the arc of that kind of tension between things getting worse and better at the same time, will that turn in favor of getting net better, right? I think it will, but it is a very dicey moment in sort of the history of human civilization. And so again, I'm sort of, there's lots of stats behind these things. I mean, we might have a little bit of time later to get to some more of those, but that I want to start with that framing of that fundamental actually optimism we should recognize about entering an age of restoration. And if we can essentially accelerate our pace at which we get to that, we can avoid planetary boundaries that could result in a very negative turn, right? If we sort of cross boundaries, and then that sort of macro trajectory I mentioned could essentially not come to bear, right? And so we have, that's the point we're at. Exciting times.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Bronson. Yeah, so a lot of that kind of information isn't making the headlines. In fact, I heard a stat on NPR that more people can envision the end of the world than can envision a bright future. So is this a failure of imagination? To me, climate is symbolic of the rising temperatures and tensions. And I think the capacities that we have to build as individuals in holding all this complexity, in the two eyes seeing. So we obviously were all well aware of all of the breakdown, and the flip side to that, and the excitement, as you touched on, Bronson, is that there's massive systems reinvention as well. So what are we seeing on the ground that's giving you hope? And I want to turn this question to you, Sherry. As you work with tribal communities across the country, helping them to build their capacity and secure energy sovereignty. What is giving you hope on the ground?
Thanks for that question. There is a lot that's giving us hope right now. Unprecedented levels of federal investment in specifically tribal communities, grants and loans through IRA and Build Back Better that the current administration has, and our dear friends who we've been working with side by side for the better part of 3 decades on enacting favorable clean energy policies, are now our friends working on bringing this funding into Indian country. And it's wonderful, but it's not without its challenges to implement the capacity issues that remain in all marginalized communities to know how to apply for this funding, to navigate, which programs are best, how to build your capital stacks to develop big projects, and implementing major energy infrastructure and maintaining it is onerous. But the hope comes from the self-determination of tribes to finally take control of their energy systems. We're seeing the federal investment spurring hope for the first time in a long while in many communities, and it's infectious. The hope is infectious. It trickles down from, it either trickles up or it trickles down from champions in tribal membership, or from a champion within tribal leadership that is helping tribal nations to see that it is possible to gain control of our energy future, and with some help. And this help isn't meant to be a continuation of the colonial capitalist patriarchal paradigm where we're dependent by design on tribal communities are on the government. It's being perceived, as it should, as an investment that is a form of reparation to help tribal communities build a foundation with this funding on which they can build their own clean energy infrastructure, microgrids, utilities, and truly sever the cord and no longer be reliant on the very forces and government that put them in these precarious predicaments in the first place for their energy. Because how can we be truly sovereign if dependent on outside sources for our energy? You can't, right? So the hope comes that there is this recognition, and we saw it at this past week's summit with the chairman of FERC and his whole team there to engage one-on-one in dialogue with tribal leaders for the first time since our electric grid was created 200 years ago. You know, this is hopeful. These are hopeful times, and we need to keep the momentum. We need to keep philanthropic investment here and corporate investment in tribal communities. We need to keep raising awareness that third world-like situations exist in this very moment on reservations in our country. I can't tell you how many times people will say reservations, they still exist. They're not just like, you know, tourist attractions. No, they are real and they exist. And if tribes have an absence of gambling revenue or tourism revenue or manufacturing or other enterprises, as many is the case for many tribes, especially in the Great Plains, it is, you know, 80% live below the poverty line. The average life expectancy is less than 60 years old for many of these communities. So when you inject this level of investment that can has a chance to build an economy based on technology that is in line with native ethos and lifeways, it's very hope inspiring.
So inspiring. Thank you, Sherry. Liz, what about you? You're making films about the future. What are some of the things that are giving you hope?
Hard to, you know, follow that up, but I'll just mention a project or two we're working on right now that's been inspiring and helpful. We're working with a recent East Coast based community solar company. So they take old landfills, brownfields, Superfund sites, places where you just can't build on them. And they've been putting in solar arrays and creating jobs and creating energy and powering towns and townships. So that's been really cool. And we've been telling those stories. And another project we've been working on that's been a hard one, but fascinating is we just flew to Wyoming last month to film. This company figured out how to sequester enormous amounts of carbon from industrial plants by retooling old coal beds in old coal country. So reusing that infrastructure by they work with a lot of geologists and figuring out how to sequester. Apparently coal absorbs CO2 faster than anything, and it can hold it. Coal seams can hold CO2 for 200 years, and those will never be mined again, those coal mines. So the coal itself can hold all this carbon. So we've been filming some of that. You know, I think you know, there's innovation everywhere, and we've worked with a couple of eco resorts and eco products. And it is really sad to hear that so many people see more of a doomsday future, but I just think that's because of the mainstream media. That's what they're hearing. And if they heard different narratives and they heard about more of these innovations like the community solar and eco products and these answers, and they were hearing about those things every day, they're all around us, people would have a more positive view.
So it sounds like we all need to do our parts to lift up these stories of regeneration and healing and energy sovereignty. And yeah, the solutions, I mean, there's so many creative solutions amidst us. Bronson, would you elaborate a little bit on some of the systems, planetary Earth systems, perhaps, that are giving you hope and that we might all look to giving a little bit of more attention to?
Absolutely. I mean, let me just, and before I give, I think maybe you're asking for some examples. Before I dive into that, you know, I just want to reflect on the mood, you know, just in my own, for me and in my own little bubble, I mean, there has been a threat of despair for decades, right? I mean, in the scientific community, you know, this is nothing new. It's been predicted for decades. And so now we just sort of seeing this kind of predicted thing unfold in front of our eyes. And I will even say this, I don't know if this sounds snotty or something, but like there was all this bad press about the IPCC as being too, you know, as like, there was some basically fake news about bad press about IPCC. I don't know if you all remember that whole story. My concern had been for a while that the IPCC was under so much pressure to kind of be aligned with, you know, a decade ago with the mood, which was not kind of confronting the science, that we were hyper cautious, right? Hyper conservative. And when you're conservative, what you do is you don't talk about the things that you don't absolutely know. And of course, you know, complex climate systems, you know, rarely are you going to absolutely know. We only have one replicate, you know, unit of replication here, which is our planet. And so what I'm saying is that I think the IPCC has actually been underestimating, and so that when you talk about like, oh gosh, the number just came down, it's like, yeah, if you look at most of the IPCC reports, like there has been a history of basically underestimating the outcome, but that itself, I would say, is somewhat predictable. And so what I'm saying is, yes, there's been a threat of despair. Having said that, and forgive me if this sounds really, I don't know what, deranged, but the moment that we're in now, I find for the first time in quite a while as kind of a bit of a relief that everybody's freaking out. And it's like, wow, finally, we're all freaking out together. And that is kind of, that's a relief, because we have to freak out and we have to confront, you know, the reality and the science of the situation. But when we do that, and as we do that, and as we start to, you know, to lean in on this kind of changes that Sherry mentioned, that Liz mentioned, and I'll mention one in a moment, that is when, you know, this whole other story can blossom and emerge, and it is, and we see it happening in front of our eyes. All right, so that's kind of this moment we're in, and it's incredibly exciting. So also to Sherry's point, I will just echo that the financing, right? So the private sector financing that is become available in just the last couple of years for natural climate solutions is an order of magnitude what it was maybe 5 years ago, right? There's a sea change happening. Mm-hmm. What I call natural climate solutions, right? Which is all the ways in which we can protect and restore and better manage ecosystems, and basically better land stewardship, that can contribute about a third of the cost-effective climate solutions, kind of writ large. It's essentially, it's right next to the energy sector as kind of the biggest sector. In the latest IPCC report, it was represented as the biggest with energy sector for solving climate change, and there are a number of sectors. We have to do them all at once. And so even though it's still the biggest gap, the biggest investment gap is in natural climate solutions, the amount of increased financing is rapidly scaling up, and it's incredibly exciting. So one project I'll just mention quickly that is an example of what we're able to now finance, given all this investment, and given, and you know, ASBN is exactly what we need, and exactly an example of what is, you know, is fundamentally optimistic. It's these kind of, you know, coming together of folks in the business world. So project we call CISPADA. It is essentially bringing financing to support communities in coastal regions of Colombia, and now this is expanding out to many different places, that depend upon mangroves for their livelihoods, and they harvest mangroves for wood. So it's basically creating a partnership between local communities that has historically managed these mangrove systems and the government in Colombia. And those communities are basically becoming park guards, right? So this is it's not a park, right? It's community managed lands, but it's also protected by the government. It's considered public land. And so these communities are basically reporting whenever there's a conversion event, right? A clearing of mangroves and actual, so you can harvest trees and not clear the system, and actually sustainably do that. And so that's an example of financing to build capacity and build these connections, and actually also support the government to build a relationship between communities and government to protect mangroves and to sustain livelihoods there. There's lots of other examples, and I'd love to talk all day about them, but I know we should move on. But let me just say that there are a tremendous number of different exciting examples about rural communities of all sorts of different types, basically building essentially green economies around climate smart management of these landscapes, and basically transforming the way that both farming, forestry, grazing, all those systems, much of it is old wisdom, right? Much of it is actually looking back and learning from what the kind of sustainable management that had been practiced for a long time previously, and kind of returning to those, and that's mixed with, in some cases, high tech, right? So mixed with, but the old and the new kind of coming together to essentially to reinvent the way that we're managing ecosystems. And the financing to do that is much of that is coming from the private sector, and that's incredibly inspiring.
Totally. And I love that we're all unified in our collective freak out. That's good to be unified in something. But you mentioned fake news. I know we're seeing this rise in AI. I want to ask this question of, how do you yourself individually, as a change maker working on the front lines of climate and justice, how do you sustain resilience within yourself? And then once we answer this question, I want to make sure we speak to those who are listening on the line about how they can engage in some of these great solutions. But first, could you offer some hacks or some tips to our audience about how you yourself are able to maintain your balance and joy and peace, even while on the front lines of these big issues? Liz, would you mind kicking us off?
Sure, I won't. Actually, yeah, I have a bunch of perspectives here, so I'll just throw some offerings out there to try out. From a business perspective, to just start with, given this is the American Sustainable Business Network, as a B Corp small owner, there are companies out there, taking carbon and retooling it, sequestering it, making products out of it, making materials. There are all kinds of regenerative farmers, there's seaweed farmers, there's so many exciting things that are creating new jobs. So collaborating, I think, is the best way to hire within these circles, to partner within these circles, I think is a real great way to build resiliency. And for example, on this call is Iva, a loved colleague and member of the circle, who has just recently, for example, connected a bunch of us media women who are story producers working in a similar space, who are all in our own little silos creating eco storytelling. And she just connected us all. And, that's an example of a collaboration, of a way we're trying to build a large body of eco content to help shift mindsets in my world. And so that's an example that's really exciting to me. We can just do more together than we can do alone. And we all bring different strengths. Technologically, I think using technology to protect our ecosystems is a huge, carefully, is a huge advantage. Like solar has helped protect, Amazon tribes, a couple of Amazon tribes, for example. I think it using technology in the right way can help us. It can help create equity, and geopolitically and naturally, or just the sun is like the great equalizer. That's another way to think about resiliency. Like the global north has generally recently been wealthier, but the global south is where more of the sun is. The solar is going to be, running our world soon. And I mean, it is running the world, but we will be using it for all the energy systems soon. And so if you think about like cell phones, they didn't happen overnight, but they've spread across, for example, Africa or India, in places where there weren't even phone lines, faster than, phones. So I just believe that the elements, if we work in harmony with them and we work with them as partners, they're the great decolonizer. Like that's how we build resilience. I think the last thing to mention is just the youth. Like the climate movement is awesome. I can't even believe your kids probably, but millions have taken to the streets, and there's youth-led organizations everywhere. And oh my God, they're so fierce. So I'm Gen X, so they make me feel old, but they're, they just, I feel so resilient with the youth movement. And philosophically, like just looking at the species, I know we have a scientist on this panel, so I shouldn't talk too much about species, but like, science, IUCN says that 30% of species are facing extinction. There's our doomsday narrative, right? But like, on the other hand, due to successful conservation efforts, like the bald eagle and the condor and the buffalo and white rhino and antelope and a bunch of species have come back in resilience, the gorilla, the lynx. So like even the Siberian tiger, that, it's awesome. And COP15 just happened where 200 countries agreed to try to halt biodiversity loss. So these are hopeful, resilient efforts when we work together. And then just personally, being a ninja, just with your mind, being disciplined about it becomes habit, I think, and it's hard.
Totally. And having to hold the whole and the, these bigger macro systems, and then also kind of zooming back to ourselves and our families. What about you, Sherry? I know you're going to take a little time for yourself after what's been, I know, very busy stint for you. What ways do you kind of keep your peace in the midst of this crazy world we're living in?
When we're being ninjas. Yeah. I'm sure I am in the same company. I don't relax when I take time off from this, because I feel like what we're doing is so urgent. And, I'm not so boastful or conceited to think that, me taking a week off will make a damn bit of difference. But I don't sleep, like I'm sure you guys feel the same. So what I tend to do to not get into state of despair is, the first thing is a gratitude practice, which I find is essential to keeping myself, in a positive frame of mind. Like just think about the things that we have, right? Mm-hmm. And that we're grateful for, like that helps. Looking at my children and knowing that if I give up, like what's left for them, that helps. But as far as like physically, things that I have learned from elders, indigenous elders, my own family, but especially those that I interact with on a daily basis in my work and when we go into the field and visit, the term being grounded comes literally from touching the earth. And that, and there's science behind it if you want to read about it, but as often as you can, and I try to touch my feet to the earth, and sit on the earth and be in contact with it, not with shoes, not with, not on a patio or a deck, and that's all great. But if you can actually put your feet in contact with the earth, there are physiological things that happen to us, that our blood pressure lowers, and it's a state of mind, but it's also a physiological changes that happen. So try and do that. Like I have friends that say, I don't know, but whenever I go to the beach, my stress is the lowest. Well, think about, we're barefoot and sitting in the sand at the beach, right? That and the ions, the wonderful ocean air, and out in the nature, like Bronson is right now. Just even if you work, like I try and work outside, as much as I can. Just be in connection with this mother that we're trying to save. Like if you're trying to save it from within an office building and manufactured artificial air and everything, it's like you lose sight of it. But that's me. That's what helps me. And you have to do what makes sense for you and what feels right, but take a breath.
Yes.
Pause.
Such a good reminder. And what about you, Bronson? Do you have anything to add to that, to this lovely list of things, ideas for self-regeneration?
I mean, I will echo, I think what we're all talking about is, just to put it but echo others, but put it in slightly different words. It's like, we're all talking about, how do we be joyful warriors in this moment. And so I think I will just confess, I think a lot of my solution to that is pretty small-minded. So let me talk a little bit about a small-minded, but maybe sort of, there's a lot of things that many of us can do, even if we're not kind of achieving some of the levels of awareness that I think some of my colleagues have. We just like, look, let's just like make a top whatever 3 or 5 list of the most fun things that you can do for the climate, right? Like, just what are some really fun, and there's some crazy fun things we can do, right? And then just like lean into the fun. But now, having said that, there's actually a fair amount of materials out there and information out there that we can help us identify, like, yeah, let's okay, it's got to be really fun. Not all things are going to be fun, right? But let's go out and find the things that are fun and lean into those. But it also has to have real impact, right? And so there's an exercise to do to sort of rank things by fun and by impact, and then like, hey, there's some really fun stuff that also has high impact. So okay, very simple example, like electric cars. I just got an electric car. It is so freaking fun. And I feel very self-indulgent, and it is self-indulgent, but it's a blast. It's got crazy acceleration. It's like a high performance car. I've never had a high performance car before. And now I get to like be smug about it and like, what fun. So that's just one example. But here's another example that for me personally is extremely fun, which is, as you said, on vacation, we purchased a piece of land in West Virginia that actually amazingly inexpensive in certain rural parts of America, and we're restoring that land, right? So we're restoring the American chestnut, we're restoring the American ginseng, which has been just over harvested, and we're restoring most of these forests, but some fields, and that restoration, a lot of that restoration is actually is substantially reducing our family's footprint, right? And we go out there and just have a blast. We have fun. Our kids were out last night with these sparklers, like dancing around in a field with stars above it. And I was like, oh my gosh, like this is a blast. And so one last thing, which is just one example to get, I think, a little bit more serious about this, is that, and to sort of link with, I think, maybe some of the broader narratives we have here, we're just right now in peer review, but we think we're very close to publication of a paper that is going to be the largest ever analysis of the relationship between the titling of indigenous lands, right? So these are indigenous communities that have historic, of course, rights, but they have not been recognized by governments. And we're looking at this across all of the countries in the Americas, because that's where actually there's better data. It's harder to find data about this relationship between historic lands and titling. But we found a statistically significant and strong connection between when indigenous lands achieve titling of their lands, rates of forest loss go down, okay, statistically and repeatedly. That varies depending on context in different countries. So people that support, this is just forms of joy, invest in activities and organizations that are building capacity for indigenous communities to to engage their governments and raise their voices and get title for their historic lands, that is good for climate. And that is a very, very large potential, actually, when we run the numbers on this, of actually avoiding deforestation, which is one of the largest sources of emissions, right? Every tree is made of carbon, and that carbon turns into CO2 when the forest is converted. So many different examples. There are many different forms of joy. And I've gone from one extreme of like buying an electric car to like another extreme of actually supporting indigenous communities. But there's so many different ways that we can, I think, find joy in this journey.
Thank you. Always such a great reminder to find joy. And I love that image of the joyful warriors. And I'm glad, Liz, you named our wonderful member, Iva Kaufman, who is a masterful connector. And it's just such a reminder of the need to just connect and support one another in this work, that we're not alone. And we only have just a few minutes, but I want to make sure that each of you has a chance. So just if you can keep it fairly condensed, to pitch a call to action to the American Sustainable Business Network community. We want to support you. Sherry, can we start with you? How can this community be of service to all of your work in the world?
Ask questions, learn about the indigenous communities that are around you, support them, visit, support indigenous businesses, learn about the sophistication of tribes, and know that doing business with tribes, especially now, there's wonderful tax incentives and transferability in this legislation that makes doing business with tribes really a good risk. So just learn, ask questions. We're here, indigenous-energy.org or tribalcleanenergy.org. We're here to help educate and to develop a network of companies looking to be in right relation and work alongside tribes to build their clean energy futures. Thank you.
Amazing, Sherry. Liz, how can we support you?
I think what we can do is work together. Diversify. I mean, in this circle, everybody is already doing it, but the concept of intersectional environmentalism that Leah Thomas wrote this book about, which is just gives me such hope. Like the way ecosystems thrive with diversity, the same with our businesses and building a sustainable future. So just not, and also I think, Sierra, you had mentioned in some notes that book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a F. So just fiercely go forward like these 15-year-olds out there and just build this sustainable world ahead of us. Do not let the business as usual forces just keep going. That's I think, yeah.
Take control.
Work together.
Together, yeah. Yes. And Bronson, what about you? Any closing words for us before we sign out?
Gosh, I think I'll just quickly, just repeat this sort of framing notion that we are, I believe that we're in a double or nothing bet right now. In this sort of, I guess we call a poker game with the biosphere. And things are going to get very exciting. They're already exciting, right? I mean, when I say exciting, right, in very bad and very good ways, all at once. But we ain't seen nothing yet. And so there's a lot's going to happen. If I was to give one prediction, because I can't predict the future, but I would predict this is going to be the most change that we've experienced in our lifetimes is going to happen in this next, let's say 5 or 10 years. And so, I guess the last point I would make is that, like, nature has our back, right? Nature is right now mopping up half of all of our global pollution, despite all the impacts, right? Despite all of the impacts we have on ecosystems. And just imagine what can happen if we actually restore and restore Mother Nature, and enhance that incredibly resilient system that we depend upon.
Well, thank you all so much. To the age of restoration. Appreciate each one of you, and let's stay connected as we pursue this story of hope, renewal, and regeneration. Thank you so much.
Cheers.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Sierra. Thank you, everyone.